All right, welcome back. So let's get this thing finished up. So first thing I want to do is make the eyeballs here clear so we can see through those. So I'm going to go over to my textures, find a glass material, and if I use this glass solid, I believe it is, sometimes it'll not show correctly, like it'll be black like that, which obviously is not the ideal situation. So if we just find regular glass, that one seems to work pretty well. There we go. Now it is kind of like foggy, but that's fine. We will adjust. Now what I can also do is take this one here and drag the same material onto that one. So I'm dealing with one material there, not two. Same thing with the eyes. If I turn off the clear eyeballs, I should be able to drop that eyeball material onto that one, and they should have the same texture, same eyeball material, so that should be good. All right. So now I'm going to go to this eyeball material, just double click it. I'm going to give this a white color. There we go. And then I can play with the refractive index to create more of a shine on him. Some moving hotkeys, if you don't remember them, left mouse button to tumble around, middle mouse button to zoom in and out, just scrolling, and then middle mouse button, press and drag, you can move the scene around. Okay, so there's no alt in this case, it's just dragging it. And now we should be getting a bit more refraction on those eyes. Make sure that's set to glass. Do I have them on? Oh, I turned them off. There we go. That's why we're not seeing it. So back to glass. Yes. Now I can play with that refractive index. Okay, I definitely want that to be white. And refractive. There we go. Now when we look at it from the side, we should be able to see the eyeballs like that. Okay, and the bigger this number is, obviously the more distortion we're getting. Okay, so first thing I want to do is just kind of zoom out a bit. You'll see that he is not on the ground here. So I'm going to go to my scene. I'm going to grab all of my items here, and I'm just going to add them to a group. So way down at the bottom, add a group. I will click on model sets, make a new group, call this character. Okay, do you want to blah, blah, blah? I'll say yes. And now I can click on this group, go to position, and then say snap to ground. And now he'll be actually like above the ground. Before it was cutting through him, obviously that's going to look weird. All right, so I'm going to go over to my environment, and I'm going to find an environment that I think would fit my character pretty good. It's updating right now. I've imported some stuff. Okay, so what we're going to do is as we drag these into the scene, we're going to look at just him. Ignore the background and everything else that's going on. We just want to fill him with this, with some nice lighting that looks natural. Stuff like this is not going to work very well for him, just because we get these like really weird reflections in his eyes. You know, that's going to look kind of funky. The best ones to do are kind of these realistic looking ones, so something like an interior or an exterior, which is the outdoors. Okay, because it gives your character more of like a sense of placement in the world versus being in a studio. Okay, especially with, you know, they have these highlights of the sun coming through that looks nice. Now I am noticing some faceting on these, so I'm just going to grab this one and find out, edit geometry, continue. And then what I want to do is just edit the normals. And I'm going to go to, I want this to be 180. Let's try that again, edit, Yes. Edit normals. Oops. Oh, I'm on eyeball texture, that's why. I need eyeball clear. These ones. There we go. Nice and smooth. Okay. I'm probably gonna do the same thing for the other one. Yep, same thing. So it's just because it wasn't really smooth inside of ZBrush that it came over like this. Eyeball clear left. Back to, oops, make sure I click on the right one. Back to that other one. So edit geometry, edit normals, and then make sure this is up to like 180, and then apply. Make sure we're on the right one again. Hit don't show that again. There we go. That's nice and smooth. Okay, so ignore the background right now. This would be kind of weird to have him in this background. We're just looking at him and looking at the lighting that we have there. So first, you just want to find one that has maybe some nice coloring, something that enhances the look of him, right? So something like this may not be good, but maybe if we were to rotate it, it would be good. So I'm going to go to my environment. I'm going to scroll down to attempt to scroll down. There it is, to rotation. And I'm just going to rotate that around like that. And so that looks pretty nice the way that's set up there. You can go to the HDR editor as well, and you can add other stuff. So if you wanted to adjust some of the lighting in here, you could add a pin. And you'll see how I can, create this other light inside here that can, enhance the look of that. Get rid of this geometry view. I can take the radius of the light up. I can come down to the brightness and make it brighter. I can give it a tint. And then when I'm done, I hit done. Okay, so you can do stuff like that too, and you'll see that even affects the reflection inside here. And if we wanted to affect that differently, we could grab that pin, and I believe there is a blend, or we can blend this in so it's not as apparent. And then obviously we'd adjust the brightness some. Let's try more of this orangey tone. There we go. That looks pretty good. And again, you can see it with and without. Just click the eyeball off on that. Maybe it enhances it, maybe it detracts from the colors and stuff you were looking for, but I think that's fine. Eventually we'll turn this on to color, and you'll see how we have just this. You could do backplate too, but for what we're doing, we'll do this actually in post. Okay, so I'm not too concerned about what this is because we'll adjust that afterwards. I'm really looking at, what does he look like? So I'm going to go back to the materials. I'm going to double click his material. And then other things that I can play with here are things like specular. So right now he has no specular. This is basically just like flat coloring coming in. And if I pull this up, you'll see how we're getting some specularity on top of him now. And again, we can kind of go into more of like this complementary color of, he's purple. So if I went to like a yellow, that would be a complement to that purple color. Don't go too strong on them. You want them to be a little bit, right now he looks wet. So I want to take the value down, take this down, and just give him like a little bit of a highlight, nothing crazy. I could even pull the roughness up some. So now we're getting more of that, tinted color versus, anything looking glossy or glassy kind of thing. Typically, if we had more time, we could actually bring in specular materials. We could bring in bump maps. We could bring in opacity maps where needed. But for the time we have allotted, we're just going to keep this pretty straightforward. Okay. Most of those maps, just so you're aware of it, would be created off of this diffuse. So we would actually bring this diffuse into Photoshop. We would enhance it some to make the specular look like the specular. We'd enhance it to make the bump. And then that's where, while we're inside here, as we're going to that multi-map exporter, so many menus. There it is. We could export things out like the ambient occlusion and like the cavity. And what those do is allow us to get a couple more maps that will create the look of our character. Okay. So that's pretty good. I'm going to go to his eye material. So go back to materials, click on the eye. And then I'm going to start to play with some of this. So if I take the roughness up, we're not going to notice a huge difference. If I take the refractive index up, we're not going to notice a huge difference either. Because he really isn't, it's not transparent on his eye. Now, there is no specular, so I should give this a little bit of specular. Okay, and you'll see what, obviously a lot of specular is doing. Pull that down some there. You can look right at the eye to see what it's going to be doing. So there's a specular. Obviously, too much specular, you'll see the entire eye inside looks really wet. So we want to pull that down. Again, something we would export more maps of, and we can create a specular map or a bump map. You can also tint some of the colors. So if you're not liking the color that came with it, you can go with a blend with color. And then right now it's being blended with black, so obviously we're not seeing anything. Let's say I went with this yellowy color. You could do that as well. Okay, so if I wanted to give him, a purplish tinting to his eyes kind of thing, I could play with very desaturated look to his eyes, and then give it that kind of tint. Then again, using that eyeball to turn it on and off, I can see what that looks like. I could also open this image into Photoshop and then export, change the colors there, and then export it back out and then save it in here. Okay, that's pretty good. All right, so I'm going to assume that our coloring is good from here. Again, with the time we have, we just don't have hours and hours to really delve into this. I'm going to save this as a regular, not package. And I'll put this into my 2520 character. Okay, now I'm going to go to my camera or my image, and we're going to render this out as an 8x10. Okay, so this eventually will be 3200 pixels tall by 2400 pixels wide. It won't let me type those numbers in here though. So I'm going to go to 480 pixels in the width and 600 pixels in the height. All right, it's not letting me do that either just because it was so tight. Let me get rid of this properties at the bottom. Try that again, 600 here, 480 there. There we go. Okay, so now this lets me fit it. Okay, now ideally you would have this, linked like this. Then I'm gonna hit the lock link, and then I could increase this if I need to. I'm already right there, so I'm not going to. All right. You'll notice that my character is really distorted. As I get closer, his face looks really long. So I'm going to go to my camera. I'm going to go to my focal length, and I'm going to make this bigger. So 150, you'll see how it really makes him look a little bit more proportioned versus where we were. It's a distortion. Like that pretty much is what we were getting before. I've exaggerated it, but that's what we're getting. So 150 seems to be like a good perspective focal length. You could try other ones, like 300, maybe like that, maybe 800, and see if you can find something that works for you. Now you do have to be careful you don't go too far because then you're going to poke into the bottom of this. Okay, so you want to find a good spot to show off the character. Okay, nothing dead on. those look really, kind of horrible. So something like this is going to be pretty good. There we go. That, okay? And notice too, as I type in, let's say 500 or 200, KeyShot does a really good job of keeping my character in the same spot, but just updating that number. Okay, so 400 looks pretty good. I'm going to go with 400 here. If there's a little bit of space down there, that's fine because Photoshop will allow me to kind of crop that in. Okay. Or I could just do it now and not have to worry about it. All right, that looks pretty good like that. Cool. I'm going to go under lighting, make sure global illumination is on. That should soften up the shadow a little bit. Otherwise, maybe I'll add in under my HDR, create another pin. And then I can actually click right on the character, and usually that'll hit it. Yeah, I think that shadow on that is just so intense, it's not really going away. Let's go back to settings. Let's hit done first. Go back to settings on this. Those aren't really going to do anything, so I'm not seeing the ground. Brightness, contrast. We can also do this where we increase the brightness of that image. What we're looking for here is nothing that looks too muddied. So if I take the contrast down, that's just way too dark. If I pull it up, obviously we're blown out. So you want to find something with some good values that we can work with inside of Photoshop. So lowering the contrast is not a huge deal there. We can leave it. Maybe I can blur this. Yeah, so it's giving me a little bit softer lighting on here too. All right, I'm going to go with this. I'm going to say this is good. My lighting works. Okay. So I'm going to go to my render, go to render here, and then I'm going to render out a still image. So I'm going to put this into my folder. And for whatever reason, it just likes to go to these random folders here. So you really have to make sure it goes to your folder, because otherwise you'll have a hard time finding it. Sarcona character, under my renders, yes. And I'm going to give this a name, Sarcona KeyShot character 27. So I'm going to say do all render passes and then add this to a PSD. And then here I'm going to set my width to 2400 pixels, and that will automatically set my height to 3000 pixels. This is going to give me a 32-bit PSD. And then under my options, I'm going to make sure this is at least 128, okay? And then I'm going to hit render. Okay, now pretend I just hit render. All right, so this process of hitting render and then letting it go, that might take an hour to render out, okay? And you may have to do a couple of these to test things out. Now you could do this inside Nuke, the next part, but Photoshop is great for this kind of thing because it really allows us to go ahead and create a lot of layers and paint and whatever else, more so than Nuke would allow us to do. The only downside is that we have to do it over and over and over again. All right, now just so you're aware too, as you're rendering, you may see stuff like right away, like, holy cow, those eyes are really bright. We may not have noticed it inside here, so we can hit stop, stop it and not save it. Oh, that came up. There we go. Let's save our KeyShot. Something's going on, it's thinking. There we go. And then we can come back and maybe adjust the brightness of our scene, or go back to the eye material and maybe just pull up some of that color inside there. Right. All right, so let's try that again. Render it again, and render. All right, so it looks like it's done. So you'll see a check mark when it's done. Hit the check mark. And then we're going to go into Photoshop, and we'll do some additional work. So I'm just going to save my KeyShot. I can close that. I can close my ZBrush. Yes, I will save that also. All right, my login. Now I should be able to go to open and then find my stuff. Character, renders, and there it is. Yep. All right, so here is my character. Now this is the way it comes in. I have an RGB, which is just the flattened out image, what we just saw. And then we have render layers, which are all the different layers that make up our character. So we're going to attack this in a couple different ways. One, we want to eliminate our background, and then we want to enhance our image just like we've talked about before. So first thing I'm going to do is go to my clown layer here, go to select, and you'll notice that because this is a 32-bit image, that when we go to select, we don't have all of the options we would have before, like color range. We do have one that says subject, and what this does is it basically picks the stuff based off of color of what we're trying to do. Now, we're not really getting that selected, so I'm going to deselect. And I'm just going to turn all these off except for depth. We'll see if we get a better selection there. Nope, still not a good selection. Okay. So we'll just convert this right away. Sometimes you can get away with it, and sometimes you can't. So I'm just going to convert this to an 8-bit. Don't merge. There we go. Now I'm going to go to this, go to my select color range. Now that it's 8-bit, I should be able to go to this and select that, and then go to my plus sign, click the eyes, and then do a little bit of fuzziness to grab all that. I can also use the plus and just kind of drag it around the eye area, and that will help select things. I could also hit the quick select and just drag around here, and that'll grab everything. There we go. And what I'm using this for is just to create a mask. So I'm going to go to my render layers here, and I'm just going to put this pass inside that. And then I'm going to click on that pass, click on the mask, and then that will automatically subtract everything from there. So all my character stuff will be inside this folder, and then anything else will be background stuff. Okay. So I don't use the clown for anything after that, so that's done. We do have a label, but there's nothing on it, so I can just ignore that. We do have ambient occlusion, so I can go here and set this to multiply. Now ignore what's happening now because we're multiplying this, and then if I hide that for a second, this is shadow, that's what that looks like. So I'm going to also multiply shadow. There's nothing in reflection or refraction. We do have something in reflection, so I'm just going to set this to add. There's nothing in caustic. There's nothing in GI. Here's our lighting, so I'll set that to add. Here's our diffuse, I'll set that to add. Our normal is this bluish one, I'll ignore that. And then we have our depth, I'll ignore that for now. Okay. So this is where it's gotten us this far. Now some of these we don't need, like lighting and diffuse, we can just turn those off for now. Okay. And reflection, I'll turn that off too. Okay, just so you can see what these things are doing. So there's our original render. I'm going to delete the ones that we really aren't using. So these ones here we're not using. And clown we're not using either. There we go. Okay, so here is the regular render. There it is with ambient occlusion. So anytime we do this, we want to look at it and see, is it enhancing our image? And so as we turn this on, if we look at these areas where we have skin touching, typically that's going to be where we're looking at ambient occlusion. As we drop excuse me, shadow on this, is that enhancing it? It looks like I might be lighting it or darkening it a bit too much. Okay. Now we don't have to stick with just what is here. We can also go into our adjustment layers and do a curves on it or levels or something. And if you're still under 32-bit, again, those items are limited. Okay. If I start adjusting this now, it'll adjust the whole image. I don't want that. I just want to affect ambient occlusion. So I'm just going to hold down the Alt between these, and then I can click on this and adjust just the ambient occlusion. So you can see how I'm just adjusting the darkness that we have. Okay, and again, I'm kind of looking at before and afters, before and afters. You're going to see if it's enhancing it. Definitely looks like it is. Okay, obviously you can go too far, that's too much, so you want to find a good range. I can go to shadow and do the same thing. So go to curves, click that. Okay, and then what this is doing is it's taking the white areas and making a lot more white, making it a lot more black, giving us a lot more contrast to this. If you're not sure, you can always set this back to normal and see what it's looking like. Okay, so this shadow one now is going to darken these areas here and keep these areas the same color they were. Okay, oops, not add, multiply, there you go. And again, we can look at the before and after. We can also come up to opacity and knock the opacity down. That way it still has some effect on it, but we're not, it's not overly done. Here's our reflection. Again, something we may not want fully on here, but let's say we knock this back a little bit. We have a little bit of tweaking that we can do. We can also go into hue and saturation. Hold down Alt, click between them, and then we can shift that color. Let me take the reflection all the way up so we can see it. Okay, so here's the default, and then as I slide this, it's going to red, to purple, green, blue. We can also desaturate it. We can also brighten it. Okay, now if you brighten it, you're brightening up this image, which if it's an ad, it's going to make it brighter. So you just have to be aware that, if you brighten it, it'll do that. Okay, so I'm going to keep it about where it was and maybe just adjust it slightly and then go back to my reflection and then take that down to something softer. And then we have this lighting one. And the lighting is basically just like the light of our character. If I shift click, alt click, there it is. There's our character without anything else. It's just like that's the character. So sometimes I'll use that. In this case, I don't need to, so I'm not even going to worry about using that. Here's diffuse, so we'll alt click on that, and we're getting this like purpley color. Okay, so I may want to add that to this, and then again, just take the opacity down some, or try one of the other modes. Sometimes you'll find like in this one, color dodge, pull that up some. We actually get a nice bit of color kind of like undertoned inside of our character. So I actually like the way that looks, having that on there. And then the depth is for depth of field. In this case, we really don't need to worry about that too much because we are pretty flat in how we have this set up. So we'll just keep it there in case we need it. Even though it looks like it's solid white, we've kind of destroyed the values because of we made it 8-bit. Yep, so everything is pretty much gone. So this doesn't even help us out in this case. Let's delete that too. Okay, so now we can turn all these back on, except for lighting. I'll let me use that. And there's our base render. So now we'll close this. We'll add another layer. And we'll just add a gradient in the background. And the gradient is up here. And this is Photoshop 2020. So there are different options. So like I'm just going to grab this and go like that. I think I actually want to sample maybe a color from him. And then I'm using this other color here, also from him, maybe this dark color there. And I will smooth out a little bit. I think it's just too bright. I really want him to pop, so I'm going to really darken that other one. Here we go. Okay, so there we go. So base is done. Now I can come into this and start to play. So I'm going to go into my render pass layer here. I'm going to click on this. And now I can add in maybe some highlights to the character just to help him pop even more. So I'm making my brush big. I'm going to eyedrop a color from him. And I'm going to lighten it up a little bit. Okay, so now this layer here is just going to add some highlighting to it. This is too harsh, so I need to soften it, maybe like that. And you can see as I do this, it's actually lightening the color, okay? Now, as I do this, I don't want to eliminate values, and that's what it's doing. It's eliminating those values. I want to lighten it, so I'm going to change this to an add, and then take the opacity down. Okay, and what that should do is just give us a little bit of pop. And again, you can play with other methods here and see if any of these are going to make it look a little bit more like a rim light is what we're going for. Actually, like that, I think that looks nice. So I'm just going to give this a little bit more value there. Okay, go on the ears. Go to this area. And if I make a mistake, I can go to my erase, maybe. I don't know why that's automatically jumping to that. There we go. And then same thing, I want that hardness to be about the same. Oops. I can go ahead and erase some of those values. Okay, so here it is without, there it is with. So you can see it just adds a little bit more like a rim light, making him stand out a bit more. Some other stuff I may want to do to him too. I'll make another layer. So I'm going to give this a name. This will be rim light. I may want to adjust some of the coloring. So I found that sometimes in the lip area, the color will bleed a little bit more than I want. And I just want to soften this. So I'm going to go here and just eyedrop some of that color. I'm going to take my opacity down. And I'm just going to soften that a bit. Okay, now it's way too much. We kind of lost it because we're overwriting colors. So again, we can come in here and see if one of these, looks better than the other ones. Okay, I'm not really seeing one that looks better than the other ones. Maybe I'll take my opacity down on that. There we go. And then again, kind of looking at the before and after. Maybe I'll sample a couple other colors inside here. Maybe even change my brush to something that is more like sprayed, like this chalk one. I'll take the opacity really far down. Okay, and it's just softening some of that color into that. Okay, and again, look at the before and after. Definitely looks softer. I still think I probably want to take the opacity, say, up a little bit more. There we go. And then see if there's one that would make it look, I think this lighten one seems to make that look a lot better. There we go. Okay, now I can also make a new layer, use my stamping tool or my clone stamp. And then same thing, every brush I use, I take the opacity down or I take the flow down, take something down, just so I can reintroduce some of these values of, grain or whatever it is I'm trying to bring back in. And what I'm looking for too is lines. If I see a definite line there, that's a bad thing. So I want to eliminate that. And sometimes I'll grab from, let's say here, because there's a lot of texture. And if I'm soft enough about it, I should be able to give that appearance, okay? If it starts to twist the color, then I'll have to grab from somewhere else and replace that color back in. Okay, and sometimes you'll use several layers. I may make another layer on top of this, where I go back with my brush, I drop this color, and I'm just kind of replacing that color value on top of it. You'll notice I'm zooming in and out a bit, just so I can see what it looks like zoomed out. Sometimes I may also grab, let's say, a swatch from here. Copy that, paste it, slide it into this area. And then I can throw a mask on this, and then just kind of blend in those edges. Slide that over some. And if it takes too long, that means just my opacity is way too low down. So there we go. So again, it adds a little bit of detail back into it. And I can slide this around too if I, need it somewhere else as well. So that looks a lot better. I'm going to take all of these, which is the lip repair, and just Control E to merge them. And then if you look, that looks a lot better than it did before. Okay. And even with it at 100, I could still dial this down some if it is too strong. Or I could put a mask on this and then start to blend in the previous values. So again, I'm not totally changing it, I'm just modifying it. Okay, and this is again where Photoshop is a little bit more superior than Nuke for doing this kind of stuff. This would be a lot trickier to do inside of Nuke. Other stuff we may want to do, we may want to change, let's say, the color of the eyes. Okay, so once I have all this stuff set, on the very top of this, I can make an adjustment layer. So hue and saturation. If I click this, and I go to where the eyes are, and I click and drag, I can pull their desaturation or pull the saturation down or up. Okay, and then once I do that, so I'm going to try this again. I want to grab more of the blue area. There it goes. So it's a matter of getting that right spot. There we go. Then I can go over here and twist where that's at. Okay, now this isn't doing it for the whole thing. It's just doing it within the color range that it's specified here. So if I wanted to change a little bit of the color of the eye, just by doing that, I can do that. Okay, and it's subtle. It definitely is subtle. It's not, a huge change. But that definitely can add a lot to your character. Last thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go and grab everything I have here. So I'm just going to, I'm going to make sure my background is good. I may want to modify this a bit more. Maybe I'll go with a radial and see what that looks like. Oops. I have the old colors still in here. There we go. That seems good. I think that red is maybe a little bit too burgundy. I'm going to desaturate it some more. Let me check this hue and saturation. Looks like the, well, no, I guess not. Interesting. Okay, cool. So let me go back up to here. Let me go back up to my curves. And I'm just applying curves to the entire character. Just to do some overall color correction on him. And again, if it's too much, you can always take the opacity down of that. That's good. Good. All right, so now what I'm going to do is take everything, and I'm just going to Control-Shift-C after I've selected everything, and then Control-V. Now what this gives me is one layer where everything is just joined together. So now I can do some other stuff. So I'm going to duplicate this again, set the top one to multiply, which makes it really dark. Then I can put a mask on it. And then go in with my black and just start fading out the middle of this. Okay. And actually, I'm going to fill the entire thing. Oops. What are we doing, Photoshop? So fill the entire thing with black, and then we'll color it white. So I'm using this mask as a way to kind of darken these edges. All right, this brush is just way too slow. So I'll go back to my regular standard soft round brush. There we go. Much better. Take the opacity down, make the brush huge. And what I'm doing is just kind of hitting the edges just to give us more of a vignette on our character. Okay, it's very similar to the process we did inside Nuke, except we, drew a mask and had that happen. There we go. All right, so that looks pretty good. Maybe I want to adjust some of the colors on him just slightly still. So I'm going to click on this. I'm going to click and drag on his, on his face here. And I'm just going to desaturate some of that color. There we go. So there he was before, a little bit maybe too red, and then now I have this. Now that is a difference from when we originally had him, he was purple, but there's nothing saying that we couldn't push him into the purple realm. I can find the purple realm, there it is. And bring him over to this side. And again, just kind of giving him that look of it, we have that ability to go ahead and tweak things. I actually like having this more like human in skin tone. And then on top of that, I can always go, let's say I went back to my mask here, there it is. I'm just going to control click, I'm just going to make a new layer. Actually, I'll make a new human saturation, there it is. I can slide that over to the purple, there it is. And then I can go into here and maybe just adjust how much of that is happening. I'm just painting with black on that mask to control where the purple's happening. That way it gives him maybe this purplish hue to him, but we don't have it like overly done. There we go. So there it is before and there it is after. It is a purplish kind of tint to him. So you really got to use Photoshop as a tool to really customize what you want this end result to look like. Okay, and maybe even, I think, going in here, making a new layer, adding a little bit more highlight to these lips might help. Yeah, that lightened color seems to be good. And then let's go in with the dark color. If I just painted in some darker lines on this lighten, that will help kind of break up the highlight. We can do the same thing up here. Oops. Or maybe just up there. There we go. So now if we look at the original, and I like to see this too, so I'm going to duplicate this, drag this up to the top. Go. And I'm going to take all of this and just group that and say mods. So now we have, this is our before, there's our after. So you can see how far we can take something and really enhance the look of it simply by going into Photoshop and just screwing around with a couple layers for a little bit. Definitely a lot better than what we had here. Here he looks really flat. There we have a lot more dimension, a lot more, it feels like, texture happening underneath the skin, a little bit more lighting inside there. Much better. Okay, so that's it. What? Save onto my computer. It's kind of weird. Sarcona. Character finished. So I want you to save a PSD. So I'll have the PSD with all the layers. And then I also want you to save a TIFF without layers. Okay, so the TIFF I can open up pretty much anywhere, but the PSD I need specifically Photoshop to open that up. And so when we go into our folder, you'll see that I have a whole bunch of stuff inside here that probably I don't need all of it. So I'm just going to copy this and wait. All right, my folder is 28 gigs. I'm not going to copy that. That'll take forever. So you will copy it, and then you'll go through and just delete all the stuff that we don't need. So like this stuff here, this is stuff that I exported out from my other one. You'll delete that because you don't need that. Here is my PSD. Here is my image. So I'll save those two things there. Under render maps, I have other stuff you don't need. You don't have those. Under maps, I have other stuff. You don't need that. Okay, whatever your latest ZBrush file is, you'd save that. Okay, so here's my Goblin Paint, which is 2 gigs. Here's another Goblin Paint. Here's another Goblin. Here's my old character head PSD. Here's my other ones. Okay, so all the stuff that we don't need from ZBrush, you can just wipe out. Okay, and the same thing for Keyshot. Any of the Keyshot stuff that is not the latest, you can wipe out. Save any of your textures. Save any of your models that you've exported. So here's all my textures that I have. These are all TIFF files from out of ZBrush. Here's all the BMPs that are also from ZBrush. Here's some other stuff that I have used. You won't have all that. There's my Keyshot file from today. And then that should be it. Okay, so just make sure you have all of those things wrapped up in a nice folder, and then you'll turn all of that stuff in nice and easy. Cool.